tack, and I say thank you because the seminar will be in English. I have with me the present ambassador from Israel to Sweden, Yitzhak or Isaac Bachman. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Here. I'll go directly to questions because it's not much time. We're going to talk about contemporary antisemitism. The word antisemitism to me is just a euphemism, a fine word for persecution, prejudice, hatred against Jews. So contemporary antisemitism, what's the difference?
Well, I think the difference is that the old antisemitism, not the old good, the old evil antisemitism, there isn't any good antisemitism. The old antisemitism is antisemitism against individuals and against establishments of minorities, communities. A minority community in Sweden of Jews is a subject to, not only in Sweden, and individuals of the same communities. I think that in the dark days of deep antisemitism, the approach to individuals and establishments had three steps of first demonizing. Those are 3 Ds. The first one is demonizing, attributing to Jews all the evils of whatever happens to the same society. They control the economy of the world. They are the reason for our problems. The second step was another D, which was looking at Jews in a discriminatory way. It's a discrimination or double standard. You take the Jews and you say, oh, because they are so demonized and because this is what they are, we should treat them differently. So you have different laws and you apply different standards. And the third step, and this was the most terrible one during the Nazi times, Second World War, the Holocaust, was the legitimization of Jews in the sense of, they don't have the right to exist.
No, exactly.
Now, I think that this anti-Semitism against individuals and minority as an establishment, as a community of individuals that are Jews, has a third layer today in the modern world. The third layer is a different layer than individuals and minorities. It is the state of Israel, because it is declared as the Jewish state. So by being a collective of Jews, this is a subject for anti-Semitism. And in today's world, you see how the international community treats Israel in those 3 parameters of demonizing, and after demonizing, it is double standards. And then today, and we have heard it here a few meters away, it's BDS. BDS is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And it aims, that's not my invention, it's not my theory. The organizers, those that established the BDS movement, the aim is to suffocate the state of Israel and to let it vanish and fade away.
So what you say is that anti-Semitism has risen from one person to person and groups to a state level, to a higher level.
Exactly, and I'll elaborate on that.
No, I'll ask you to give some examples.
I'll give an example.
To illustrate.
Look into whatever happens in the global game, international organizations. The UN, the Council for Human Rights in Geneva, all organizations of the UN, the time that they devote to Israel and to the terrible practices of Israel is disproportionate, but it is unbelievable. If you look at the Council of Human Rights in Geneva, 6 times there were inquiry commissions made to investigate Israel and its practices of human rights, 5 only to all the other countries combined in the world.
Including North Korea and...
including North Korea, Iran, just name it, all of them. So in other words, the agenda of the international community when it comes to Israel is terrible in demonizing it. And the terrible thing is that the free world takes part in it. It's Sweden in it, and it's the free world in it too. They support it. And this is a result of an international game that is, makes it impossible for countries like Sweden to apply real morals. What is applied in the UN system and its agencies are interests. It's an interchange of interests. Mm-hmm. So if you need votes, you have to vote like the majority expects you to vote. Mm-hmm. And you have 40% of the UN members states are democracies. So you have to fish for votes for your causes in deep waters of countries that don't know what democracy is. And in most cases, and this is the essence, in most cases, we are talking about anti-Israeli massive votes against Israel as a result of something that is not discussed in Sweden at all, which is the terrible anti-Semitism, not in Europe. In Europe, at least, you have governments that fight it. Mm-hmm. It's not politically correct. There is some success in preventing it. Look at what happens in the Arab world. With no Jews, they have 95% of anti-Semitism. And this is the massive hatred of so many countries to Jews and Israel creates a reality in which you have to please them, and by kicking Israel and by being anti-Israeli, you earn their votes and their sympathy. So Israel is another tool in political games that have nothing to do with the substance.
But if you say that anti-Semitism today is directed against the Jewish state, then you have to answer the critical question, is every criticism of Israel then anti-Semitism?
No, not at all. It becomes anti-Semitic, and I don't feel comfortable with the word anti-Semitism, but there's no other word that I can use. No. I would coin another term, which is anti-Jewsrael, because it is anti the Jews in the state of Israel. But it is very difficult to talk to the heart of the people and to convince them that this is what it is. Anti-Semitism is not criticism. Criticizing in a democracy like Israel, criticizing Israel, there's no problem. We can deal with it. The problem is that in the same situation, when you criticize Israel tenfold, 10 times the criticism you criticize any other country in the same situation, this becomes anti-Semitic. This becomes tendentious. This becomes cornering out a state because it is the Jewish state, not because of the political situation. And by the way, there is what I am describing here is not my invention or my country's invention. There are definitions. Look at you can Google it later. Look at the US State Department website and Google US definition of anti-Semitism. And you will see part of the definition has to do with the state of Israel. It tells you what are the things that amount to anti-Semitism against the state of Israel. It's not my definition. It is the State Department from 2010. And this has been adopted recently in 2016, in March in Bucharest, by the IHRA. It is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is a body that was established by Sweden during the times of Göran Persson as Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. Okay? And this organization that consists of most of the free world countries adopted the same definitions. Mm-hmm. Check me on that and you'll see it.
Okay. Stay on this question just a little bit, because, I mean, you must meet it all the time. Can you criticize Israel and so on? Can you sort of define a line? Where do we step from legitimate criticism of Israel over into anti-Semitism?
You have it daily in Sweden. You have it here. You know, everybody talks about the Israeli practices. We have an administration that is so much focused on the Israeli self-defense practices, and terrorism is not discussed at all. We have seen a government here, Swedish church, media, very much focused on the Israeli self-defense practices and not in the cause of the problem, terrorism. You know, you guys here in Sweden prepare yourselves today for the same terrorism. And you still are busy when it comes to Israel to what we as victims of terror are doing to protect ourselves. You should learn from what we are doing and not criticize.
You published on Facebook yesterday. You can't see it. It's you can look at Facebook if you're in there. A couple of libelous, anti-Jewish cartoons from the Arab world. What was your intention of giving this out to the Swedish public? Because you're directing yourself to the Swedish public.
It is to bring to the Swedes the very piece of news that the Palestinians are preaching for anti-Semitism. They do it daily. It's not a one standalone issue. It is an ongoing policy of the Palestinians, and we have the Social Democrats here as a sister party to the Fatah. And I send them all these materials regularly. They know exactly how anti-Semitic, how anti-Israeli, and how awful, terrible is the description of Jews and Israelis is by Arabs and especially Palestinians. There's not going to be ever any peace possible, no matter what papers would be signed, when you educate generation after generation from childhood, from infancy. People, children that would hate Jews and would see them as the demon. And instead of fighting it here and being able to show the realities and to try to convince Palestinians, Sweden has a great leverage. The donations that Sweden gives to the Palestinians from the taxpayers' money are great. I'm not saying not to give it, but you can condition things. This is a great leverage on the Palestinians to stop what they're doing, but it's never done. All the pressure is done publicly against Israel. There's no pressure whatsoever is exercised and exerted on the Palestinians, not publicly. When I complain about it, the government officials tell me, we tell them when we see them. So my answer is, it's either you are equally and publicly criticizing both parties, or you are equally criticizing them discreetly. You can't discriminate one party. This is creating anti-Semitism. Part of the anti-Semitism is to show how Israel is terrible. Israel and Jews are going together. You can't prevent it. It's not my work to do that. It exists. The linkage in between Jews and Israel is inevitable. And when you have a growing number of Muslim minority that comes mainly from the Middle East, you bring into Sweden and into Europe the same political Islam that is talking about anti-Semitism and the terrible Jews and demonizes the Jews. That's why you have also more anti-Semitism in Sweden.
Yes, I was going that way. You're coming into it because earlier you talked about states being realistic or pragmatic or even cynical in their decisions. But we also see a growing popular anti-Semitism in Europe. What patterns do you see behind this? You mentioned immigration from those areas.
Well, I'll tell you, as we speak tomorrow, by the way, there's going to be a demonstration in front of the synagogue in Stockholm of some neo-Nazis. Well, this still exists. It doesn't vanish. Yeah. Jews remain Jews, and they are, for just being what they are hated. But still, when I look at what's going on in Sweden, there is a government that is acting, that is doing its utmost. Maybe, practically it can be a little better, but still somebody takes care for this. When it comes to Israel, not only that it is not an illegitimate anti-Semitism against the state of Israel, on the contrary, all the free world participates in it. In the anti-Semitism against minorities, Jews individually and as communities, in Sweden and in Europe, same governments are protecting them, more efficiently or less, but still they're protecting them, and they don't see this as a legitimate thing. And I think this is something that is done with a lot of thinking. I think that even in Sweden, the fact that there's a government that is so much declaring itself against anti-Semitism on one hand, and on the other hand is so critical to Israel, is a kind of, you see, we're okay with Jews. It's not anti-Semitism. It's the practices of the political practice of the state of Israel. But I'm afraid that this is not the reality. The reality is that Sweden itself and Europe and the free world too often is giving its votes and support to the resolutions that are very anti-Israeli as a result of other interests. We are sacrificed as another tool in different games, political games.
The next question is in a way not to you, because if we accept what you say, the problem is ours to solve, but I still put the question to you, what do you think we should do about it? We here in Sweden.
Well, I think, the public opinion here is in accordance with the policies of the government. Israel is viewed here as the villain of the Middle East. I can hardly have my opinions as a representative of the State of Israel approaching the Swedish public to let them know what we think. Our version is not heard here. There's one version, one narrative. It's a Swedish-made Middle East model, and this model is the model with which the public is provided, and it is extremely one-sided. Most of the public doesn't know too many facts that would change its mind, and when I do have the possibility to somehow bring in my version, it's a kind of a 10-15 minutes like we do today, which is very short and not effective enough. The other version of the Palestinians, how terrible are the how terrible is the life of the Palestinians, and I won't tell you it's great, but the key is in their hands. Stop hating Jews, stop preaching for hating Jews, live in peace with Israel. We'll have no reason to defend ourselves. How come that a country like Israel, so successful in so many fields and so free and democratic, becomes so to speak, crazy and wild when it comes to the Palestinians? Why isn't this question asked here? What is it that makes us so wild when it comes to Palestinians? It is self-defense. Self-defense of Israel in Sweden is illegitimate. Before the elections 2 summers ago, in 2014, Stefan Levin, then as the head of the party, not the prime minister, during the first days of fire from Gaza to Israel, he posted a post on his Facebook page saying that it is Israel's right to defend itself. I don't know if you remember this, but there were thousands, literally thousands, of comments that were purely anti-Semitic, surely anti-Israeli. It was so scandalous that it was taken off the air because it depicted the party terribly. But this is the thinking in Sweden of Israel. Israel has no right to defend itself.
We are running very short of time. Put one last question to you, and it's really, I think, a question which your opponents would pose to you after hearing this. Aren't you overly sensitive when you say that?
No, I'm not. I'm not sensitive. I think, if anything, we are very tolerant. You know, you see me still talking reasonably. I hope so. And I'm not wild, not now and not ever in Sweden. But I think that if you look behind you and you see 3 big guys with big sticks running after you, you're not paranoid.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. It's Bachman.